Hello, I'm here today to talk about retrieval practice, and this session is specifically aimed at parents and carers and family members. And what this session will aim to do is explain how learning happens. This is something that all teachers need to know, but I also think that families need to know this as well, because once we understand how learning happens, we can all support learning as well. So my name is Kate Jones, and I'll just give a little bit of a brief introduction about me. I've been a teacher for over 10 years now. I'm a history secondary teacher, but I have also taught primary and I've taught a range of subjects and I've held leadership positions. And in addition to being a teacher, I've also authored 6 published books, and 3 of those books focus on what I'm going to talk to you about today, which is retrieval practice. And I'm incredibly enthusiastic about retrieval practice. And the reason for that being is based on my own classroom experiences. By embracing retrieval practice as a teacher and sharing it with my colleagues and with my students, I've just seen an incredible impact, a very positive impact, an improvement in progress, in grades, in confidence, in motivation. Therefore, I'm really keen to talk about retrieval practice to everyone that's in the school community. Before I do get to that with retrieval practice, here's a question for you about the capital city of Kenya. Do you know this? So the answer is Nairobi. You may have got that, you might not have, or you might have seen the answer and thought, yes, I knew that. You could have been at that point where you thought it's on the tip of my tongue and the answer was somewhere in your memory, but you just needed a little bit longer. Now, the reason I asked you this question is because I wanted you to actually retrieve information from your long-term memory. Now, if you couldn't answer that correctly, that could be because you needed more time, you forgot, or that you didn't know the answer, so that there was what we call a gap in your knowledge. But hopefully now that is something that you do know, and that if you get asked that question again in the future, you should be able to recall it more easily. Because here's a fantastic quote from one of the world-leading experts on memory. Using your memory shapes your memory. Using your memory changes your memory. What this means is every time we have to recall information from long-term memory, every time we retrieve it, it changes that information, that memory, so that it should make it easier and quicker and stronger and more recallable in the future. So this is what's at the heart of retrieval practice. It's practicing recalling information for us to improve our memory. So just to elaborate a little bit further, what is retrieval practice? It's actually a teaching and learning strategy. You might have thought by me asking you that question that I was testing you, and that might sound something like an assessment or an exam. And in an assessment and an exam, questions are asked where students have to recall from long-term memory. But this is different. When students are asked questions and asked to recall information from their memory, if it's retrieval practice, the purpose of it is to strengthen and improve memory. So as you can see here, retrieval practice focuses on getting information out of memory. Now, teachers do have to explain the content and make sure that information transfers into the memory in the first place. But then this aspect is pulling that information out of memory. And it can be verbally. So you could have answered Nairobi and said it out loud, or it can be through writing. Both of those class as retrieval practice. So the key message is that retrieval practice helps memory, and therefore that helps students with learning and making progress. So evidence from research, and there's so much evidence from research. I won't go into that today, but I have written about evidence that is, some of the evidence is dated from over 100 years ago, and it's been replicated. There's been studies, there's been experiments, and that evidence is incredibly positive and overwhelming that retrieval practice is a great strategy. But it's not just the evidence from research in classrooms and labs around the world. My own classroom experience and the experience of other classroom teachers around the world matches that evidence, in the sense that we are in agreement that this is an effective strategy to support learning. And there are other strategies that students and teachers can do, but they're not all as effective as retrieval practice. So you could still be thinking, well, isn't this just testing? Isn't it assessments? And I've already said, no, it's different. But I think this is a great question that is asked. I often hear this from a lot of parents, and I understand why it's asked. So I think it's important to explore what retrieval practice is and what it isn't. So this is not used for assessment. So if a teacher is doing an end of topic assessment with their students, they should make that very, very clear, and that this will be marked, and it perhaps could have a grade, it could be reported home. That's what we call summative assessment, or that's something that's quite high stakes, like an exam that students sit at the end of year 11 or the end of year 13. Retrieval practice is not that. Retrieval practice happens every single lesson. And imagine if it was high stakes tests in every lesson. School would be a really difficult, stressful place, but it isn't that. The focus is low stakes. So teachers make it very clear that we are doing this quiz to improve our memory, to see what you can remember, what you can't remember. And when we find out what you can't remember, that helps me, and that helps you, and that helps parents. So those are the gaps that we've identified, and we can now focus on closing those gaps. Often with retrieval practice, the scores and the results aren't saved. So a student might write an answer on a mini whiteboard that's held up so the teacher can see it. The teacher can see what the students can and cannot remember, and then they rub off their whiteboards the information. So that's what we call low stakes. Low stakes doesn't involve any pressure, doesn't involve any stress, and there is a very clear distinction here. We can also provide clues and prompts to students. Research says younger students need a little bit more guidance with retrieval practice, but even with older students, I could give a verbal prompt. So if I was in a lesson and my class were writing down everything they can from their memory about a specific event or topic, and a student was struggling, I could go over to that student and I could give them some verbal prompts and cues to help them. And I could say, well, okay, if you're really struggling and you're writing about Henry VIII, and I could ask some questions, and I could say, why don't you write about what happened with the monasteries? And I've given them a prompt and guidance. Whereas in a high stakes exam or assessment, I am not allowed to do that. And again, there's that distinction. Retrieval practice is such a flexible strategy. There are lots of things that teachers could do in school with retrieval practice, that students can do on their own with retrieval practice, and that parents, carers, and families can also do with retrieval practice. So in terms of these different types of retrieval practice, what are they? Well, first of all, we have multiple choice questions. Now, I could have actually increased the likelihood of you answering the question about Kenya correctly. If you had no idea what it was, I could have included Nairobi alongside some other capital cities. And if I'd have included Paris and London, well, that would have made it very easy for you, because you know through power of elimination that it wasn't those. But I could have made it harder by including some capital cities from other countries within Africa. So multiple choice questions on how well they are designed can be really good for students with retrieval practice. And it gives them the correct answer, but they still have to recall from memory which one is correct and possibly explain why. So there's lots of different types of quizzes that we do in class. They could be done on paper, they could be done online. There's so many fantastic online quizzing tools that were really helpful during the pandemic. We can also just have verbal conversations. That could be between a teacher and a student. That could be a student and their partner, or that could be a student and somebody at home when they talk about what they were learning about in school. Writing down from memory what you can recall. This could be answering a question. This could be something that is known as a brain dump. I did not come up with that name. A brain dump is write down everything you can remember about this topic. So if one of my students is studying the Treaty of Versailles, they could get a pen and paper, and that's all you need. This is not an expensive or difficult strategy. It's very simple, very low cost. So they think, right, I'm learning about the Treaty of Versailles. I'm going to write down everything I can remember about it. So they have no notes. They do it all from memory. After they've done that, what they could do is then look at their class book or their textbook, or even go online, check if what they wrote was correct, give themselves a tick, and they could get a different colour pen and they could add information to it. Oh, here's some information about the Treaty of Versailles from my textbook that I didn't include. And then it shows very clearly in black and white what a student can recall correctly and where the gaps are in their knowledge. As I mentioned, mini whiteboards are really popular in primary and secondary school. They write an answer on their whiteboard, they show it to their teacher, and then they erase it. That is not stressful at all, but it's very helpful because the student has to recall the information and write it down. And then the teacher can scan a class and check who answered correctly and who didn't. And one of my books, the Blue Retrieval Practice book, just contains over 50 ideas. So it doesn't explain research, it's ideas and tasks and activities for the classroom. And these can work in all different subjects, with all different ages, with all different learners. As I mentioned, I'm very passionate about retrieval practice because there are a lot of benefits to this strategy. And the first one, as I've already said, it's really powerful. It's really effective. Students can improve their memory and their recall, and they can make progress if they regularly use retrieval practice. Identifying gaps in knowledge is very helpful. If a student is revising and they're highlighting and they're underlining or they're rereading, this makes them feel familiar with the content, but it's a false illusion of learning. It doesn't show them in black and white, yes, this is what you can correctly recall, and this is what you can't. And so often as a teacher, parents have come to me frustrated or disappointed, and they said, I don't know why my child didn't do well in your assessment because I saw them revising at home. And it is heartbreaking when a student doesn't do as well as they want and they've been really trying. But then I asked the parents, well, how were they revising at home? I said, well, the night before, they spent 4 hours reading the textbook. And then I explained, well, actually, cramming and rereading are not effective. Instead of spending 4 hours the night before rereading, your child would have done better if they'd have spread those 4 hours over, let's say, 4 days. So did an hour a day for 4 days and used retrieval practice. They were quizzing, they were writing down from memory, they were using flashcards, they were verbally recalling information. It's highly likely they would have done better. But parents don't always know what the effective and ineffective strategies are. And that's why I'm creating this video for you today, so that parents can intervene. Also, there's research, but I've seen this in my classroom. When students are remembering more information quickly and correctly, They get a huge confidence boost. And that's incredible to see. It really is just so lovely. And then they start to understand that retrieval practice works. And then this motivates them to keep using retrieval practice, to keep improving and keep getting better. And retrieval practice can be really fun and enjoyable and rewarding. It's not like a pub quiz. It's very different in the sense of, in a pub quiz, I could be in a group and a really difficult question is being asked. I think, whoa, I have no idea. But someone else on my team knows it. We get it right. We all get the point. Now, that person has recalled the information. I haven't. So when we're in school, we like individuals to recall the information. They can still work together and talk about their answers. But the way that it is similar is that people enjoy going to a pub quiz, or if you watch The Chase or University Challenge, you get a question right. It's very satisfying and rewarding. And that applies in the classroom. When students do well on quizzes, they feel happy, they feel confident. And as I said, it's effective, but it also is enjoyable. So how can you use retrieval practice at home? We as teachers use retrieval practice day in, day out, and that helps students. And students can use it independently too, depending on their age. In primary school, obviously, for younger students, it can be more challenging. But asking questions about what was studied in class can really help. So reframing conversations. Instead of saying, what happened in school today, or what did you do? Or you could still ask those questions, but those questions focus on what students did with the tasks, or it might be, oh, well, two of my friends had an argument today, and it might be the social side, but actually be more specific about the learning. So what topic are you learning about today? Okay, can you tell me a little bit about that? And then when they talk about it, and even if you don't know for sure, it could be something you're not familiar with, but the key thing is they're verbally recalling information. And try and remember what they have been studying so that you could ask, oh, remember a few weeks ago with Miss Jones, you were studying about why Henry broke away from Rome. What can you remember about that? And then that might be a few weeks ago, and they think, oh, yes, I remember that. And then they start talking about it, and that's retrieval practice. It can also be keywords. Are there any new words that you've been learning in school? Oh, can you tell me what they mean? Because retrieval practice works really well with vocabulary. Encourage children to quiz themselves. So if you see your child studying and they're highlighting and underlining and rereading their notes, encourage them to do something different. Say, actually, why don't you write a quiz? Use your textbook to help you write a quiz or your class notes. And then later, I'll quiz you on it. I'll ask you the questions and make sure you have an answer sheet. Or they could use flashcards. Others, if they have a knowledge organizer, you could quiz them on that. So move away from ineffective strategies and move towards effective strategies. So that's really key. As I said, the fact that when parents understand what's effective, we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Teachers in school, across the school, are all saying retrieval practice is brilliant and it works. And the parents and carers and families are saying it too. And it becomes part of the whole school community. Now, my books that I shared with you were written specifically for teachers. I didn't write them for parents. However, there are two fantastic books here if you're interested in learning more. Patrice Bain is a teacher, a very experienced teacher, and she was actually involved in some of the famous research studies in America. And she wrote a book, Powerful Teaching for Teachers, and then she wrote a parent's guide too, with lots of advice. And there's a company called innerdrive.co.uk, and I'm a really big fan of their work. And they have written this superb book, which very clearly explains 77 research studies that parents should know about. Retrieval practice and memory is mentioned, but not just that. There's research about sleep, about listening to music, about mobile phones, about motivation, behavior, lots and lots of things that could be very useful. So a few key takeaway messages. Learning happens over time. So if you ask your child a question and they can't remember it, don't panic, because forgetting is a very normal part of the learning process. It could be somewhere tucked away in their memory. They either may need longer or more practice. So if you ask your child a question and they can't recall it, tell them the answer, and then later ask them that same question again, and hopefully they can. Because retrieval practice shows us all what we know, what we can correctly recall, and what the gaps are in our knowledge. When we have a gap in our knowledge, we can revisit it, we can go over it. Then we use retrieval practice again to quiz ourselves on that gap, and then we keep closing that knowledge gap. So I hope this was helpful for you. My next slide, oh, my computer's just frozen. Here we go. My final slide is stay in touch with me. If you have any specific questions about how you want to help your child, regardless of age or subject, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and I also have a teaching website. Thank you for listening.